Hi, everybody. I'm Kat Margulis, and I'm your host of The Power of Story. As a longtime journalist, author, and book coach, I tend to see story everywhere I go. But in recent years, I've had the opportunity to see how story can transform lives and businesses. And that's what I want to explore through this series with you, is how you can create the life, business, and legacy of your dreams. And so today, I am so thrilled and honored and excited to have with me Lisa Cron. Lisa is the author of Wired for Story, Story Genius, and most recently, Story or Die: How to Use Brain Science to Engage, Persuade, and Change Minds in Business and in Life. She spent a decade in publishing and has been a literary agent, television producer, and story analyst for Hollywood studios. In her work as a private story coach, Lisa works with writers, nonprofits, educators, and organizations, helping them master the unparalleled power of story. And wow, Lisa, like when you put it like that, I mean, mic drop, right? Like your experience and all the work you do is mind blowing. And actually, a couple of years ago, one of my writing friends recommended your book, Story Genius, to me, and I have it here. And I have literally dog-eared, oops, the mic. I have literally dog-eared every single page. Like it's about double the size when you hold it up this way. There's just so much great advice and gold in here. So thank you for this book.
Yay.
And yeah, so thank you for being on the show. Welcome.
My utter pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And yeah, so, again, I've dog-eared every page of that book pretty much, and that's just one of your books. So I'll try to be laser here so we can cover as much as possible. So to begin, in your experience, what are people missing when it comes to story? Like, what's the top misconception around storytelling?
I think the top misconception about story, and when I say story, I mean story rather than storytelling. I try to stay away from that word because that's performative and it's someone who is a good storyteller. But story itself is wired into the brain. It's how we make sense of everything. It's built into the architecture of our brain. And the biggest mistake I think that we make, and it's taught by the writing world, it actually started, believe it or not, with Aristotle, who I hate to say it, but got it completely wrong, is that we think story is about the plot. We think story is about something that happens. And that is not what story is about. In a nutshell, what a story is, whether we're talking about a story you're using to convince someone of something, whether it's a two-word tweet or you're writing, the next War and Peace. Story is about how somebody has to deal with a problem they can't avoid, and something in their belief system needs to shift in order to solve the problem or see it as something different than they thought it was to begin with. In other words, story isn't about an external change. Story is about an internal change in the mind of the protagonist, or, I mean, if you're telling a story and you actually got a protagonist, or the mind of the person who you're trying to change, or the story that you're telling, so that they have got that, what I like to call a Vulcan mind melt. When we are lost in a story, they've done functional MRI studies that show the same areas of your brain light up that would light up if you were doing what that character is doing. I mean, we really literally are there. Think of story as the world's first virtual reality, minus the geeky visor. That's what story is there for, to teach us how to deal with things that we haven't yet had to deal with, good and bad. That's what stories do. Because the two ways we change and we learn anything is, one, going through an experience that teaches us something. And since there are a lot of experiences that if we went through, we'd be like, it would be game over. Those experiences we can experience through story by literally being there, because it literally does pull us out of reality and puts us into the reality of the story, which is why, neuroscientists and evolutionary biologists really know that story serves a real survival purpose. It is a survival mechanism. And the point is, we don't turn to story to escape reality. We turn to story to navigate reality.
Oh, I got goosebumps. Holy crap. Again, there's like so much there just I'm in one answer. But what I really loved was the come from. And I agree with you. That's not what I've been taught or learned or have focused on over the years, really, until your book. Which is this reframing of the come from around story. It's not about these external things. It's really about the transformation of the character.
Exactly, internal. And the other problem, if you don't mind my saying
Yeah.
quickly, and this is especially to people who want to use story to, to bring in customers, to maybe convince somebody of something, whether it's to donate to your cause or your significant other to finally take out the trash, whatever it is, we tend to think of story, and we've been taught to think of it as something that's soft science. The story is like the bedtime stories you read your kids, or the novels or the TV shows we've all been binging over the past few years when we've been inside, or movies. And that is a format of story, that is a type of story, but story itself predates, I mean, obviously, predates movies, TV, books. It's not soft science, it is hard science. It is how we are wired to make sense of the world, and we've been wired that way for about 100,000 years. Story, again, really is a survival mechanism. We make sense of everything through story. We bring everything into ourselves, asking one very basic question, which is, how is this going to affect me, given my agenda? Is it going to help me, or is it going to hurt me? When I say my agenda, I don't just mean a surface agenda, like I want that promotion or I want a bigger house, but I mean my agenda, how I feel about myself, how I'm going to be welcomed and hopefully, brought into and kept in good faith with, and for lack of a better way of saying it, a word that's way overused these days, with my tribe.
Mm.
That is what matters to us. And story is how we do it. Narrative. We think in story. We make sense of everything through narrative. And if I could just say one other thing, because I love
Yes.
Brene Brown, who talks about this story a lot. And the only place where I take exception is just in the way that she says it, because people will go, in the stories we tell ourselves, as if it's a conscious thing. And it is not. The stories that we tell ourselves, the narrative that we use, is hardwired into our brains and comes when we're very, very, very young. I mean, that is the way it works. We learn how the world works when we are children. And because we're wired to take it in and to have that imprint as, well, that's just the way the world is, as opposed to that's how my world is and my family is and my religion and my, country, my nation. We just think, well, that is how the world is. That's it. And people who disagree or don't, they just should get a lot of therapy so they can join us over here in real reality real soon. And it doesn't work that way. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And the way that we see the world comes from one place and one place only. And that's what our past experiences taught us.
Yeah.
That's how we see the world. And again, it's not our fault. It's just that's how the brain processes information.
Yeah. And I'll jump over to, I want to chat with you about the objectivity myth. Which you talk about in your book, which is how we believe we're seeing things objectively when really we're seeing things through our own lens, our own filters, our pasts, our own stories, and our fears about the future. But we don't notice it for the most part.
Right. No, because it's the lens through which we see everything. And that's the problem. I mean, I think at this moment,
Yes.
moment going forward, if there's one thing that we know is you can look at one fact at the times when we can agree that something is a fact, and you can see two factions are going to come at it and they're going to read a diametrically opposed meaning into that exact same fact. But the problem is we tend to think that we can give people the facts and that that's going to solve our problem, because we assume two things, really three things. One is we assume that if we give someone a fact, they can unpack it. And that comes down to, what Chip and Dan Heath call about the curse of knowledge. Once you understand something, it's not impossible to put yourself into the mindset of someone who doesn't. So, and when you understand something, it's not just that you understand technically what it is, you understand boots on the ground, how it's going to affect you in your life. And you think if you give someone that fact, they'll have the exact same meaning. And, either if they do have the same meaning and they do agree with you, then you're preaching to the choir. If they don't, often they think, I know that person's trying to tell me something really, really important. I just have no idea what it is, because they can't unpack it. And if they can unpack it and they disagree with you, they're reading a different meaning in, they are going to just get angry. And here's the thing, and the mistake that we make, because I think we've been taught, again, that we have a choice in the story, that we're getting angry on purpose, that we've decided to get angry. And it doesn't work that way. The brain is there to protect us, not just physically, but our sense of self. who we are and our allegiance and hewing to the group or tribe we belong to, because that is a basic hardwired need. We all need to belong to a group, and we've needed that for about 100,000 years. So when something challenges that and challenges that need, your brain thinks, uh-oh, I'm being attacked. And it reacts in the same way as if someone was coming at you with a baseball bat, right? Somebody just disagrees with you politically, and you haven't decided to get angry. You don't decide to have your blood boil, great metaphor, right? You don't decide it. Your brain takes that out of your control because it's afraid you're going to get clobbered. I mean, here's a fun fact. When somebody really disagrees with us, blood rushes to your thighs in case you need to make a quick getaway. And again, you didn't decide to do that. Your brain did it for you. So I think that gives us a lot more empathy for ourselves and for other people. And we're not going to go, oh my God, they're so stupid. Oh my God, they're so self-centered. I can't believe it. And they very often are tragically misinformed. Absolutely. But they are going to have that response. And that's why people, I did a thing the other day for a group that is really trying to alert people to what they can do to stop climate change. And the problem they run into is they just want to give facts, and then they don't understand why people aren't going, oh God, yeah. And instead they're either arguing, or the facts are so overwhelming that they're so nervous that they don't even want to look at it. It just doesn't work that way. Facts don't grab us. What grabs us is those facts personified in a story, a specific story, one person, one problem, one solution, one internal struggle that we can feel. And now we understand how it might affect us. And that helps us want to go and make whatever change that is. Because that's the other thing. You got to figure out what that call to action is. One call to action, one problem that you're dealing with. That is it. Stories that involve us emotionally. And here's the thing, this is what Paul Zak says. I have a quote in my book that stories involve us emotionally. What I would say, I always pause there and go, a story has to involve us emotionally. If we're not involved emotionally in life and in story, we're not paying attention. They're the ones that then move us to action. They're the ones that then give us that feeling of, oh my gosh, to be my most, and I hate using this word too, because it's so overused these days, but my most authentic self, I'm going to go out and do this and solve this problem. And then that's even great, because then we can go to our tribe and go, whoa, hey, I just realized that we've been doing this wrong. Here's a way to do it that hews to our belief system, and we can make a difference. And then they not only hear your call to action, but they become an evangelist for your cause.
Yes.
And if you don't mind my saying, just going on one thing, but the only way to do that is to be able to step out of your mindset and step into theirs and understand not just that they're not already seeing it your way, but why aren't they? And not why, given what you believe is true, but why, given what they believe is true. And that is really, really hard. It is really hard, because that's the mistake that people make when they're trying to convince someone. They either think their audience is them, so they're using the same arguments that would convince them. And it's like, that obviously hasn't worked, or they'd already be on your side. Or they think that their audience is everybody. And it never is. Even like with climate change, when the audience should be everybody, those everybody's are broken into target audiences. And you need to figure out with each target audience, what's their belief, what's their misbelief, why aren't they doing the thing that you think they should do, given their belief system, what in their belief system might be a misbelief that you might be able to change, so that then the new belief, again, that coincides with what they believe, is going to help them go forward and hear what you're saying. But, as they say, last thing I'll say here is, nobody listens until they feel heard. Nobody listens until they feel like you get them.
So good. I love that. I love it. I mean, and I apologies to any writers who are watching this right now and thinking it was going to be a writing class, right? But that's why I didn't want to make this series about just that, because story is so powerful. It's a peacemaker. It's an empathy and compassion and understanding grower. And there's so much that is possible that we're not even beginning to tap into. So that's why you're reaching out to this larger audience, which is so awesome, because there's just, so much is possible in every part of our lives, when we, think about these kinds of approaches to story and where it can work.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to story, and if you're talking about writing novels and you're talking about novel writing, absolutely. I mean, they say that, that fiction, that reading novel can actually enlarge, rewire our brains to have more empathy. Because, and this is the key thing, because we are feeling what that character is feeling. Because just like life, all story is emotion based. If we're
Mm.
not feeling, we're not reading. And in life, if we couldn't feel emotion, the truth is we couldn't make a single rational decision. And that's not metaphor. That's biology. I mean, if you have a second, I can give you that.
Yeah, you would think that because you always hear, oh, that's the reptile brain, like when the emotion kicks in, that's
Right,
the reptile brain, that's the non-logical brain, that's the part of the brain that doesn't
right,
actually help us survive.
right. And if I could say, they have completely debunked that. So many people go, oh, it's the reptile. That is just 100% not true. There's no such thing as a reptile brain. It is completely debunked. But the way that we make sense of everything is through emotion. And you're probably taught, I was taught, the way to make a decision is you marshal all the facts, all the figures, all the data. You're going to analyze it, right, dispassionately in the cold light of objective reason. And
Yes.
while you do that, you got to keep emotion at bay, because emotion is that irascible scamp. It's going to tiptoe in and, cloud your judgment. You really are going to buy that pony.
Yes.
And I mean, that's a great model, because it makes us feel so safe. It makes us feel so secure. It's a great model. It just turns out not to be true. We don't make decisions based on our rational analysis of the situation. We make decisions based on how the rational analysis makes us feel. Because if we couldn't feel and process emotion, we couldn't make a single rational decision. And just to be very clear, first we took down Aristotle, let's take down Plato now. Because the cornerstone of Western civilization, that it is logic and reason that is going to get us where we want to go dispassionately. And the goal of emotion is solely to subvert logic. And we got to be careful of it, is completely wrong. It is absolutely not true. Now, I'm not saying it's the other way around. Forget thinking about it or being logical or analytical. It's only emotion. It's both and. But emotion is the decider. Do I have time to tell you the story of Eliot, and that really makes this point?
Yes.
This comes from Antonio Damasio, who is a neuroscientist. He's written several books. I think he teaches out here at USC, I think in Los Angeles. But he frequently writes about a patient he had, a man by the name of Eliot. And Eliot was a really successful guy. He had a great job, a great family. But unfortunately, he also had a brain tumor. Now, luckily, it was benign, and surgeons were able to get all of it. But to do that, they had to take some of his prefrontal cortex. And so when he recovered, and he recovered, he was like physically totally hale and hearty. But he wasn't himself. He had lost his job. He'd lost his family. He'd lost all his money to con artists. He was at home living with his parents. The government was about to cut off his disability checks because they were like, dude, you were this productive member of society. What are you now, a malingerer? So they brought Damasio in to go, yeah, what is going on here with him? And he ran a battery of tests. And what he discovered was that Eliot had lost the ability to feel and process emotion. Now, keep in mind that he still tested in the 97th percentile in intelligence. He could enumerate every possible solution to any problem you could pitch at him. He just couldn't pick one. He'd go into his office in the morning and go, should I do that thing my boss seems to really want me to do? Or should I re-alphabetize my file folders again today? And if I do the file folder thing, is it better to use the blue pen or the black pen? At lunch, get this, at lunch, he'd go from restaurant to restaurant looking at menus, but he never went in because he didn't know what he felt like eating.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, imagine that. As Harvard psychology professor Daniel Gilbert says in his great book, Stumbling on Happiness, indeed, feelings don't just matter. Feelings are what mattering means. And the takeaway is, emotion isn't the monkey wrench in the system. Emotion is the system. If we couldn't feel emotion, we couldn't make a single rational decision. And in a story, if we're not feeling what the protagonist is feeling in the moment on the page, we're not reading. And the way you get that onto the page is via your protagonist's internal struggle, because in every scene they've got to make a tough decision. In every scene they're going to struggle with what to do, with this versus that, and that is how you get emotion onto the page. You do not get it onto the page with body language, way overrated, should almost never be used in prose, and you do not get it onto the page by giving us some lovely luscious metaphor about what their tears looked like as they sobbed, because those things are generic. You get emotion onto the page by having somebody struggle with something, and you never have to mention an emotion ever, because we understand that struggle. Like if someone's going, oh my God, I promised my mom I'd get home and make this soup by 6 o'clock. And if I don't, she's going to go hungry again. And I don't know what's going to happen because she really needs food and she's not feeling well. But my boss needs for me to stay. And if I get fired and I don't, then I'm not going to be able to pay the mortgage anymore. Now, did I mention an emotion in there? No. But can you imagine how that person is feeling? You don't have to imagine it. You are feeling it.
Yeah.
The whole story is emotion based. Because emotion tells us meaning. That's what emotion does. It lets us know what things mean to us.
Yeah. And I love all of that. And it's, you can kind of graft, your process, your methodology and what you're showing us to do in your books onto pretty much, understanding your clients, your audience, whether you want to make change in the world or build a business. I'm seeing that. And your book came at a perfect time because I write books to understand people better. I'm like, why is my friend doing this? I think I'll write a story about it. And then it's like a process, right? And your book really helped me. Again, that objectivity, I can't understand, and I have to get behind their lens.
Exactly.
And that's what how you kind of walk us through that.
Because it's never about what, it's always about why. And the why someone's doing something almost always is really different than what it looks like on the surface. And that's really what I know that he sort of fell from grace, Jonah, God, my mind is blanking on his last name, who wrote, I think his first book was I'm going to paraphrase the title, but it was like Proust was the world's first neuroscientist, or Proust was a neuroscientist. Because it's true, that's what stories do. They give us inside intel on why somebody's doing what they're doing. It's like that great line in what used to be called the best movie of all time, Citizen Kane, where the newsmaker, he's died and they're trying to figure out what rosebud means. And he says to the reporters who are going to go out and try to figure out what did he mean when he said rosebud, his final word. He said, nothing's more interesting than finding out what makes people tick. Stories are about what make people tick. And, when you're writing a novel, you have to know what makes your protagonist tick, which is why, if you want to talk about novel writing for 1 second, which is why all stories begin en medias res, meaning in the middle of the thing, meaning page 1 of the novel is the first page of the second half of the story. You have a ton of work you need to do before you get into that. You got to get to what is that lens that the character is seeing through. And the only way to get to that is to go all the way back to childhood, to what I call their misbelief, and to write all of it out in scene form. It's not general. It's not conceptual. Sometimes writers will go, yeah, I've been thinking about this for a year, so it's been in my head and I'm going to write. It's like, okay, you are starting at square one. It doesn't matter what you thought about because you thought in general. It is specific, because if you don't mind, do you want me to focus? I can focus for 1 minute on the writing world.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Here's what I say.
Everybody's just going to have to go and read the books.
Yeah.
But
here's what I say to writers. I probably say this every day. If the writing world, meaning the world that gives advice to writers, all the other books out there, was a person, I would punch it in the face and go to jail happily, which I admit is a metaphor. I do not want to go to jail. I would not be happy, because almost everything you are taught in the writing world is wrong. Like, not just wrong, but like diametrically opposed wrong. For instance, one of the biggest lies that the writing world says is use backstory sparingly, and then only when the reader needs to know something. First of all, you never put something on the page because the reader needs to know it. Not that they don't, because they do, but you put it on the page because it is part of what the struggle that character is going through in the moment. Backstory is the most fundamental layer of story that there is. It's where all story logic comes from. When people talk about the narrative through line and they mistake that, because the writing world tells them to, as the plot, that is not what the narrative through line is. The narrative through line is the internal subjective narrative that the protagonist is using to make sense of what's happening, as scene by scene by scene by scene. They are trying to achieve their agenda and are constantly getting pushback. Everything they do to make it better only makes it worse. That's what stories are about, until they get to that place where they have to go, oh, that misbelief I came in, the way that I thought I was supposed to solve that is wrong. Now I see things differently. And that is that aha moment, although every scene has an aha moment, a little moment where the character realizes something that changes something a little bit and that plays forward. But that's what stories are about. That's what that Vulcan mind meld is. That's what we're looking for. In fact, I have it in Story or Die, but I mean, obviously it applies to writers as well who are writing novels, where it was a study that was done by a neuroscientist named Stephen Brown at McMaster University in Ontario, in Hamilton, in Canada. And he wanted to see like what part of the brain instantly went online when you're pulled into a story. And he thought, again, this goes back to Aristotle, he thought it would be what Aristotle said, plot first, character second. So, I mean, he put people, I guess, as they do in the fMRI tube, or he wired them up, or however they do that. And he wasn't going to like read them all War and Peace or whatever. He read them just short sentences, short like headlines, to see, you know, as the brain does what it does, which is instantly spin anything into story, into narrative, so we get it. And they were things like surgeon finds scissors in patient, or, you know, fisherman saves boy from freezing lake. And the first thing that came online was the part of the brain that mentalizes, meaning the first thing those people were looking for was, whose story is it? Why does it matter to them? What are they afraid of? What's their agenda? What's going on? That is what we are looking for, not what's happening externally. Certainly not how beautifully written and how many lovely, luscious metaphors are there. We are looking for meaning. Whose skin am I going to be in? Who am I going to do that Vulcan mind meld with? Your protagonist's brain is the command sensor of your novel. And the only way to create that is to do this work before you get to page one, which is, as I am fond of saying, is not pre-work. It's not research. It is writing. We make the mistake because we read a book from page one to the end to think we write a book, and we don't. There's a lot of work that needs to be done before, and then that comes into the novel in the form of flashbacks that don't stop the story. Oh, flashbacks stop the story. No, they don't. If you do a flashback right, somebody's trying to figure something out and they turn to the past, which is what we as humans do. I mean, our brain is, I just read a book by a neuroscientist literally called Your Brain is a Time Machine. Goal of your brain is to record past memories in order to predict the future. The brain is a prediction machine. So whenever we're trying to figure out what to do, we look to the past to try to predict what's going to happen, what we should do, what might work, and then we take action. So when somebody's in a tough situation, which they're going to be in every scene, they're going to turn to the past, not just to stroll down memory lane, but they're going to turn to not just to stroll down memory lane, but to try to figure out, what should I do? And we're aware of that. And when they come out of the flashback, something has changed for them. They've drawn a conclusion, which is another thing that writers let go, and they don't. They always have to draw a story specific strategic conclusion that plays forward, that now gives them some sort of insight, either into what to do now, or sadly, often as we look back on the past, we realize we misinterpreted it then, and now we know what was really going on. But in order to do that, the same way we're saying, if you want to change somebody's mind, whether it's your target audience or your significant other, you have to be able to step into their mind and know why they believe what they believe. Same thing if you're writing a novel. You got to go in and you got to know, not in general, never in general, stories in the specifics, specifically what happened. How did they make sense of it? So we can be in their skin, because what we're looking for in any scene, whether you're writing what I call the origin scene, where the misbelief, which is a misbelief about human nature that they have, something they believe is 100% true because life taught it to them, but actually might be true in that situation, but isn't true universally.
Yes.
But we're in their skin and we're watching, as I like to say, the penny drop. We're watching their logic shift. We're seeing why they've gone from one belief, why they suddenly believe it, not just that they do.
I love it. And like, I'm even hearing, again, it's just like that grafting of that methodology. And like, even like in business, you will see around the marketing stage is when people start to come up with client avatars, and they start to like consider the client when it's like time to get the product out there, versus before they write the story, before they build the business plan. It's like, really,
Exactly. What need might they have that they don't even know yet? What need do they have? How can you give it to them so that it fits into their belief system? Because without that, it's not going to, you could be 100% right. And it doesn't matter, because they're still going to get pissed off. They're still going to be angry because you've made them feel like you don't know them. You've made them feel like, God forbid, you're telling them something, because no one wants to be told that they're making a mistake. And the last thing I'll say, especially if you're trying to convince someone of something, is the importance of being vulnerable. We are taught from an early age not to be vulnerable. And when people tell stories about themselves in a business setting, they tend to skip over how hard it was. They tend to make it seem like it was a cakewalk. Yeah, there was this problem and I saw it and then I thought about it and then I solved it. It didn't cost them anything. And if a story is about how we learned something we did not know, well, they've got to admit they didn't know it. They've got to admit that maybe even, God forbid, they made a mistake. It's that vulnerability. It's the same thing with writers. Writers will go, I want my protagonist to be likable. And they make the mistake of thinking likable means that this character would never do anything in polite society that would make anybody feel even slightly uncomfortable for a nanosecond. Now, first of all, we don't like people like that, right? Somebody's like that. I'm like, not only don't I like you, but I wonder who you've got chained up in your basement, because this is weird. What makes a character likable, a person likable, what makes them relatable? Because I've heard people just leave it at that. Well, they got to be relatable. It's like, well, there's a generality. Like, what does that mean? It's to be vulnerable, to allow yourself to be vulnerable and open up and show someone something that they might take exception to, that admits that you didn't always know exactly what to do from birth until the moment that you're there. That's what pulls people in. That's what makes them feel like, oh God, yeah, me too. Or, oh, I've done that. Because no matter what you're hiding, we've all done it. We all do it. We all think it. It's not just you. So open up and let that out. And then that makes for that connection. And then they're much more willing to listen, as opposed to, it's like when you go to your significant other and you go, we got to talk. And the answer is, okay, yeah, but not now. Because the minute you say that, they know you're going to attack them. And they're trying to think of all the things that you do that they don't like. So they have ammunition to throw back at you. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I could talk to you forever. We get to do this again, Lisa. We get to do this again. But yeah, you guys, you gotta just grab these books again. Whether you're writing a story, you're building a business, you're creating a movement. There's just so much parallel and similarity in the power of story for whatever is the outlet for you. So Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show and for your generosity and just fascinating conversation. I could seriously do this all day. Thank you so much for being here.
Me too. It was a blast.
And stay tuned, guys. We got a lot more interesting, fascinating power of story conversations coming up. So stay tuned and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody. Thank you.